In the name of the holy and undivided Trinity, one God. Amen. Well, good morning. When I was in my late teenage years, I became more and more involved in this thing called the Bishop's Happening movement. You may have heard me talk about this ministry before. It's a weekend retreat for high school students, run by high school students. And most of the staff, including the rector of the weekend, are teenagers who have chosen to volunteer their time to organize, decorate, write talks, and prepare for about 50 other teenagers to come be loved on, served, and invited into a safe space to talk about their faith. Well, I've had the privilege of serving on staff for several of these weekends as a high school student. And on one particular weekend, I was helping some of our team put some bags of materials together, and we were standing around laughing about something that someone had said or done a little earlier. And I remember this moment as clearly and distinctly as it happened yesterday, as if it happened yesterday. One of my fellow staff members looks up at me and says, "Mike, you know, you're a lot of fun. I wish I had known that before now. You are always so quiet. I thought you were a snob and didn't really like people." Well, after getting over the initial shock of hearing what someone actually thought about me as a teenager, we all laughed about this. As I explained that I was quiet because I was really shy, and that I actually really did like people, though sometimes I was unsure if people really liked me. A classic case of mistaken or misunderstood identity, if there ever was one. As much as I figured I was misunderstood by others, I, at the time, also misunderstood my own createdness as a child of God. Now, I would like to think that I've come a long way in the past 25 to 30 years. I am still tempted to retreat into my quiet self from time to time, but that has more to do with my sanity these days than anything else. My desire for a quiet, meditative working space, a full house of 5 does not make. But I digress. It can be an easy thing to misunderstand people. As much as we ourselves feel like we are misunderstood, unloved, or unworthy. It's an easy story to get caught up in. So easy, in fact, it can become dangerous in a hurry. When we allow ourselves to become disconnected from our story as children of God, we are tempted to put ourselves in the place of God. Our story tells us who we are and whose we are. Not only are we loved, we are called to do the same for others, to love them as the very same children of God they have been created to be. Mistaken identity, choosing not to see someone for who they really are, can lead to mistrust, which leads to fear. And fear can take us places we don't want to or need to go. Sure, a healthy dose of reasonable and respectful fear can keep us safe and help us in making wise and prudent decisions about how we steward ourselves and others in our lives. But the fear that I'm referring to is debilitating fear, which creates walls, divisions, and disconnections. Paul, the writer of many of our epistles, had to deal with this same fear in his interactions with the people of Corinth. He reaches out to them in a letter to address their concerns about a flashier, more articulate preacher or prophet, and how people seem to be more attracted to them instead of him. The people of Corinth want Paul to prove himself by providing the right type of credentials, letters of recommendation to prove that he can be who they want him to be or think he needs to be. And Paul, led by the wisdom of the Spirit, turns their fears, their misunderstandings, this case of mistaken identity on its head. He says, you, the people, you, the church, are my credentials. You yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts to be known and read by all. And you show that you are the letter of Christ, prepared by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. Who you are, how you live, how you love one another. This is your calling card. This is how you show. This is how we show who we are as followers of Christ, as the children of God. We are called to let go of the fear of those questions of whether or not we're doing it right or doing it wrong. We're called to let go of that fear of saying the right things, being around the right people, or keeping out the wrong people. More importantly, we are called to listen and hear the truth that we aren't asked to do much, but we are asked to do something. We're asked to love our God. We are asked to love each other, and that's how we will know, and that's how we will be known. I wonder if those disciples sitting in that upper room after having lost their rabbi, their teacher, their leader, their friend, felt this same type of isolation, the same type of fear. What must they have been asking themselves? Did we miss something? Did we misunderstand something? Did we not know? Who were we following? What are we to do now? In the midst of that desert of doubt and questions, Jesus enters into their midst in a very real way. They seem not to recognize him, or at the very least, they seem not to comprehend that the person they followed and called Lord would show up in their midst once again. Did they misunderstand who it was they were following? But it all becomes clear when Jesus says, "Peace be with you. Do not doubt, but see for yourself, I am here." It is in the moment of his presence, his words, his ways, the sharing of a meal, that he is known once again. This is his calling card. This is when transformation occurs, when we think God is nowhere to be found, and God does what we cannot and brings life out of death, walks right into those rooms of deep despair and mourning and turns them into joy and dance. Jesus leads us out of those rooms and spaces into the world, which can feel risky. It may require trust. It may require some faith. Faith that God is doing a work inside of us which is much, much more than we could ever ask for or imagine. You see, that is what God does, and this is how God is known. As we come closer and closer to a season when we carefully and thoughtfully begin to regather around one another, when we fill the spaces in these pews once again I wonder what our calling card will be. Will we misunderstand each other? Will there be cases of mistaken identity? How will we be known? Will we choose to be known by our fear or by our love? Our love of God and our love for each other. My friend and colleague, our rector, reminded us this past week in the e-news that this process will require us to be loving and gracious to all our brothers and sisters. Jesus calls us to love our neighbor, and being a part of a Christian community like ours requires us to be sacrificially loving, generously gracious, and beautifully patient. These Christ-like values have always guided us. Our continued unusual season calls us to practice these traits faithfully and with the hope that guides us all. This is an opportunity to join in a new journey with God, bringing life out of death, walking into this world being fearful, thoughtful, respectful of things which are deserving of such, but not being afraid to serve, to listen, to seek with a heart of understanding, to know and to be known as the children of God. Amen.